Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I am your host, Chris Angle. I am the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is the Philosophical Equations of Economics. Along with me is my co-host and colleague, Rick Samuelson, a venture capitalist on the West Coast. Rick graduated from Yale. And good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of concepts being used in current media. And a couple weeks ago, John McCain did an extraordinary thing. He voted against the Obamacare repeal and replace, or maybe it was just repeal, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, all the Republicans, almost all of them, were on board, and he and just a few others declined to participate. So why is that? Why would a Republican go with suddenly stand out and not go with what they've really been trying to do for the last several years, which is to at least repeal Obamacare and get back to a privately run free market healthcare system? So I think we should explore that. And first of all, I'm going to go into the nature of being a conservative or the nature of being a Republican. And they basically see that others in their society are good, that human beings are generally in their nature good. And Republicans have a tendency to cooperate with others, to understand the goodness within others. And they cooperate to produce goods and services. And in order to cooperate, respect is needed. And the appropriate amount of respect that you show others is really the nature of all that is ethical. So the nature of ethics is the appropriate dispensation of respect to those with whom you are dealing. And we produce goods and services when we cooperate in order to bring ourselves up away from misery, and that's the need for why we cooperate, in order to produce goods and services. And even with the socialist utopian Democrats, they will cooperate. They, meaning the Republicans, will cooperate to seek any goodness within their ideas of these socialist utopian Democrats. They cooperate through compromise, which is kind of the way politicians get things done. They compromise. And if Republicans compromise in effectuating a socialist utopian democratic policy, such as Obamacare, then governments move left with each compromise. Now, the Democrats, on the other hand, they see others as inherently not good. They have a tendency to invoke coercion in order to effectuate their ideas and their policies, and whether it's to produce a policy or whether it's to produce a good or a service. They will cooperate and with those in the left to effectuate their policies, and they'll do it in a private enterprise. But outside of that, they do not see the human nature as being good. And in order to produce their objective, they need coercion, especially in the political arena. They need the principle of the ends justifies the means, and the means is coercion. Therefore, they do not cooperate or compromise with Republican ideas, and therefore the government tends to move left. And I'm going to give you an example of why we're starting this conversation here is John McCain. Why John McCain said that Republicans need bipartisan support to repeal Obamacare is a mystery to many. And why do we need to cooperate at all? They passed their legislation to effectuate Obamacare without any cooperation from the Republicans. So why would we need to cooperate? as John McCain has seemed to indicate. He seems to indicate that we need to cooperate to produce goods and services at any time. We cooperate. He wants to cooperate in order to repeal Obamacare. And he opines that repealing Obamacare with cooperation is better than repealing without cooperation. And then there is I'm going to call it the converse of this, which is that because there is no bipartisan support, then to have Obamacare is better than not having Obamacare, despite the reality that Obamacare is a disaster. And not having Obamacare is much better than having Obamacare. But healthcare in the U.S. before Obamacare was the best in the world. You couldn't get anything better. But repealing it with the cooperation of the SUDs, the Socialist Utopian Democrats, is impossible. They're not going to give that up. So there were no Democrats voting for the repeal. The Democrats will cooperate only if they can bargain to obtain at least some of their agenda, which is of course natural in the political arena. Both sides try to, in any bargain, try to obtain their priorities, and that's reasonable. But the Republicans bargain, but they always give up something of their agenda, which includes their priorities. The Republican propensity to cooperate comes from, as we mentioned, their assumption that the other person is by his nature good, and they believe, as we mentioned, that inherently they're good. And Republicans think that the nature of the Socialist Utopian Democrat is good also, and that their ideas have merit. And consequently, the Republicans should consider that they believe that the Democrats should be considered when something is offered, such as Obamacare. Therefore, the Republicans and conservatives try to examine everybody's ideas for content that may hold some goodness. Now, the Socialist Utopian Democrats are people that believe that the other individual is bad, and so they feel that others need to be ruled and managed and done so by government. But the Socialist Utopian Democrats do not cooperate unless there is a bargaining that delivers at least a portion of their goal, and that they have that they've put forth, and such as government-run healthcare. Otherwise, they're not going to cooperate. Their goals are all-consuming because they know others are bad, and as such, they must bring to more government to control people, to make sure that they do the right thing, that people of society do the right thing. In order to make sure that people do the right thing, they need power, and that is coercion. And the best way for that to happen is through government. Thus, their ethic, or really lack of ethics, is that the end justifies the means. And here, when that happens, coercion is okay, as long as that end is accomplished. So the Socialist Utopian Democrat, they cooperate only if cooperation brings them closer to their end, which is people control. And so John McCain, he just felt that we needed to cooperate because we need to examine that maybe somewhere in the Democrats' policy there is goodness, and so we need to search that out and not just outright repeal it. And that's my interpretation of why he did not go with the rest of of the Republicans. Rick, what do you think? What do you think is going on?
Well, I think that there's a sharp distinction, an ever sharper distinction between Republicans writ large and conservatives. There has long been a significant portion of the Republican Party that is wedded to growing the state, and Republicans can't hide from that history. John McCain is clearly within that group, and his notion of a conservative government is more akin to a modified Democrat government than one based on longstanding, in fact, proven conservative principles. And once again, those are limited government, sensible spending proposals, observation of the importance of freedom, a strict reading of the Constitution, an emphasis on patriotism and civic duty, both in the educational system and within the government at large, a strong military. I mean, these are long-standing principles by which conservatives have hoisted their petard over many years, not beginning with William F. Buckley Jr., but certainly he was a primary champion of that. And that being the case, I think the real battle, political battle within the United States is happening within the Republican Party. That is where the debate is. There is no debate on the left. The progressives have taken over the Democratic Party. They speak for the Democratic Party. The moderate Democrats atrophied, frankly. And so you're not going to get, as you rightly point out, any dissent. The way this is going to be decided will be in the second most important election of my lifetime, which will come in 2018. And at that point, there are many Democratic senators, I think north of 20, that are up for re-election, many of them in Republican states. And it'll be the people who will decide whether to throw the Democrats and or the moderate Republicans like McCain out in favor of more conservative figures, or we will lapse into an administration that, frankly, will be unable to get much of anything done, whether it's on tax reform, Obamacare, immigration, you name it. We'll have basically the current policies or some slight modification of the current policies in place come 2020 and maybe even 4 years beyond that.
You mentioned moderate Democrats. Are there any?
Well, there are a few. Manchin in West Virginia is moderate. I think he's genuine. And frankly, he's a good guy, quite honestly. I mean, not all Democrats are awful people. Some of them are reasonable, but they are corralled by the party leadership effectively. I mean, there are consequences to disobeying in terms of getting certain committee positions and having influence within the Democratic hierarchy. But I think the likes of Manchin and others are going to be forced out of the Democratic Party over time in favor of more left-leaning representatives who, dare not utter a word against the leadership, the progressive leadership.
Do you think that there's a possibility of, between now and 2018 election, of getting any of the conservative Republican policies in place?
Well, I still think there's a chance to overturn Obamacare because we know that the Democrats aren't going to do any bipartisan deal. as you rightly point out. And so John McCain's going to look a little bit silly in 6 months' time. And so he may be convinced to vote more sensibly. And that remains to be seen.
Right.
And he may realize, one hopes, but of course he's suffering from terminal cancer too, so that's going to complicate things. But he, in any case, may realize too that with tax reform, the very same thing is going to happen. The Democrats will resist any attempt to reform the tax system, because the tax system, as it currently stands, is bloated, complicated, has the highest corporate tax rate, nominal tax rate in the world, and they like it just fine.
Okay. Rick, thanks for joining us, and we'll see everybody next week on the Philosophical Angle program.
Thank you.